Al walked through the crowded halls of Nexus Prime with the confidence of a predator who had never known defeat. His four arms hung loose at his sides, each one ending in claws that could tear through ship armor. His scales were dark green, almost black, and they had stopped many blades and bullets over his long career. He stood 8 feet tall and weighed more than most ground vehicles. When other beings saw him coming, they moved out of his way. This was how things should be. This was the natural order of the galaxy. Nexus Prime was a space station that floated in neutral territory between three major empires. No laws applied here except the laws of money and power. Criminals came here to hide. Merchants came here to trade in forbidden goods, and mercenaries came here to find work. Was one of the best mercenaries in 12 star systems. He had completed over 300 contracts in his 40 years of service. He had killed warlords and generals. He had destroyed rival gangs and protected valuable cargo. He had never failed a mission, and his reputation was his greatest weapon. Many targets simply surrendered when they learned that Al was coming for them. He entered a drinking establishment that catered to his kind. The room was dark and smelled of smoke and alien sweat. Dozens of mercenaries sat at tables discussing contracts and sharing stories. Al recognized several of them. There was a warrior in the corner, a mountain of muscle and bone. There were 3 assassins near the bar, their bodies flickering in and out of visibility. There was even a tracker, its long snout twitching as it processed the scents in the room. Al ordered a drink and listened to the conversations around him. He was looking for work, and this was the best place to find it. But something was different today. The other mercenaries were not talking about contracts or kills. They were talking about something else, someone else. A human. Had heard of humans. They were a new species in the galactic community, discovered only 20 years ago on a small planet called Earth. They were soft creatures with no natural weapons. They had no claws, no fangs, no venom, no armor. They could not see in the dark or hear across great distances. They were slow and weak compared to most intelligent species. And yet the mercenaries around him spoke of this human with something that sounded like fear. Al moved closer to a table where a group of veterans sat drinking. He recognized the leader, a name who had worked with him on several contracts years ago. Looked up and nodded in greeting. His face was grim. Al asked what everyone was talking about, took a long drink before answering. There was a human mercenary working in this sector now, a female. She had appeared about a year ago and had been taking contracts ever since. At first, no one paid attention. Humans were new and curious, but surely not dangerous, surely not competition for established killers. But then the stories started coming in. The human had completed a contract that 3 assassins had failed. She had protected a target from a full assault squad and killed every single one of them. She had tracked down a hunter who thought he was the predator and shown him what it meant to be prey. Leaned forward and lowered his voice. He told Al that he had seen her fight once from a distance. He had watched her move through a group of armed guards like water through rocks. She did not fight like any species he knew. She did not rely on strength or speed or special abilities. She simply knew exactly where to strike and when to strike there. Al laughed. He told that humans were soft and small. They had no advantages that he could see. One human female could not possibly be a threat to experienced mercenaries. Did not laugh. He just shook his head and went back to his drink. Dismissed the stories and walked to the contract board. He scanned the listings until he found one that matched his skills and price range. A crime lord on the mining colony of 4 needed to die. The pay was excellent, far higher than normal for such a simple target. He asked the station broker why the pay was so high. The broker, a thin creature with too many eyes, explained that 3 mercenaries had already tried to complete this contract. A warrior, an assassin, a tracker, all 3 had failed. All 3 were dead. Al asked what had killed them. He expected to hear about advanced security systems or a private army. The broker simply said that the human got there first. She was protecting the crime lord now. He had paid her more to keep him alive than anyone had offered to kill him. For a moment, Al felt something cold move through his body, but he pushed it away. His species had ruled a dozen worlds through strength and violence. He had killed hundreds of beings across the galaxy. He would not fear a soft creature from a soft planet. He took the contract and paid the registration fee. The broker recorded his information and wished him luck, but there was something in the broker's many eyes that looked like pity. Al ignored it and walked to the docking bay where his ship waited. He would travel to 4. He would find this human female. He would kill her and complete his contract. And then he would return to Nexus Prime and tell everyone how easy it had been. He climbed into his ship and started the engines. As Nexus Prime grew smaller behind him, he thought about the fear he had seen in the other mercenaries. He thought about the stories they told. He thought about the way had refused to meet his eyes. These were warriors who had faced death many times. These were killers who had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer, and they were afraid of one small human. Al decided that they had all gone soft. They had forgotten what real danger looked like. He would remind them. He would show them that the old ways still worked. Strength, speed, violence. These were the tools that had always decided who lived and who died. The human would learn this lesson, and then she would die. His ship entered the jump point and disappeared into the darkness between stars. Al settled back in his seat and began planning his approach. He had no doubt about the outcome. He had never failed before. He did not know that everything he believed was about to change. 4 was an ugly world. The sky was brown with dust and smoke from the mining operations that covered the surface. The air smelled of chemicals and burning metal. Mountains of waste rock rose higher than buildings, and the ground shook constantly from the machines that dug deep into the planet's crust. Al landed his ship at a small port on the edge of the main settlement. He paid the docking fee and walked into the colony without announcing himself. He preferred to observe before acting. He wanted to understand the situation before making his move. The crime lord he was hunting was named. He was a species known for their cunning and cruelty, controlled most of the illegal mining operations on 4. He had made many enemies over the years, and now someone had paid enough money to put his name on a contract. Al spent 2 days gathering information. He learned that it had hidden himself in an underground bunker beneath his main facility. The bunker had thick walls and heavy doors. It had sensors and traps and armed guards, was taking no chances. But Al also learned about the 3 mercenaries who had tried before him. He tracked their paths through the colony and found where each of them had died. The warrior had made it furthest. His body lay in a tunnel about 200 meters from the bunker entrance. He had been killed with a single strike to a weak point between his skull plates. The weapon had been something small and sharp, like a knife. The assassin had died in an air duct above the main facility. That could turn invisible, but somehow the human had known exactly where it was. The kill had been quick and clean. The tracker had died outside the colony, in the waste fields between the mountains. He had been hunting the human, following her scent across the rocky ground. But somewhere in those fields, the hunter had become the hunted. His body showed signs of a long and painful death. Al studied these scenes carefully. He looked for patterns. He tried to understand how the human had won each fight. He could not figure it out. The warrior had been stronger than any human could possibly be. The assassin had been invisible. The tracker had senses that could detect a heartbeat from a kilometer away. Each of them had advantages that should have made them impossible to defeat. And yet they were all dead. On the 3rd day, Al decided to make his move. He entered the main facility through a side entrance and began working his way toward the bunker. He killed the guards quietly, using his claws to silence them before they could raise an alarm. He disabled the sensors with equipment he had brought from his ship. He moved through the tunnels with the patience and skill of a true professional. He reached the bunker entrance after 4 hours of careful progress. The heavy door stood before him, sealed with multiple locks and codes. It would take time to break through, but Al had the tools for the job. He was reaching for his equipment when a voice spoke behind him. The voice said that he should not bother with the door. It said that was not receiving visitors today. It said that Al should turn around and leave while he still could. Al turned slowly. His forearms spread wide, claws extended, ready for combat. The human stood about 10 meters away. She was small, barely reaching his chest. She had brown hair pulled back from her face and calm eyes that showed no fear. She wore simple clothing with no armor. She held no weapons that he could see. This was the creature that had killed 3 experienced mercenaries. This was the being that other killers spoke about with fear in their voices. Almost laughed. She looked like nothing. She looked like prey. He told her his name. He told her about his reputation. He told her that he had killed hundreds of beings across the galaxy and that she would simply be one more. The human nodded slowly. She said that her name was Grace Miller. She said that she had heard of him too. She said that he had a good record and that it would be a shame to end it here. Then she told him to leave. She said it simply, without threat or anger. She said that had paid her to protect him and that she would do her job. She said that Al should find another contract and forget about this one. Al felt anger rise in his chest. No one told him to walk away from a job. No one dismissed him like he was some common thug. He was a legend. He attacked. He moved fast, faster than most beings could see. His 4 arms came at her from different angles, claws reaching for her throat and chest and stomach. He had killed larger prey with this attack. He had torn apart armored soldiers with these claws. Grace Miller was not there. She moved like smoke, sliding around his strikes without seeming to hurry. She was inside his guard before he could react. Her small hands touched points on his body that he did not know were vulnerable. Pain exploded through his limbs. His arms stopped working. His legs gave out beneath him. He fell to the ground, unable to move. The whole fight had lasted maybe 11 seconds. Grace stood over him, not even breathing hard. She looked down at him with those calm eyes and said nothing for a long moment. Then she knelt beside him and began binding his arms with his own equipment. She worked efficiently, without cruelty or satisfaction. She was just doing her job. When she finished, she sat down nearby and pulled a small container from her pocket. She opened it and began eating something while Al lay helpless on the cold floor. Between bites, she spoke to him. She told him that she was not going to kill him. She said that killing him would bring more mercenaries looking for revenge, and she did not want that trouble. She said that he should leave this planet and never come back. She said that this was the 2nd time she had told him to leave. She said there would not be a 3rd time. Lay there in the darkness, feeling the shame burn through his body. He had been defeated by a creature half his size with no claws, no armor, no weapons. He had been beaten so easily that she had not even considered him worth killing. After an hour, feeling returned to his limbs. He freed himself from the bindings and made his way back to his ship. He left 4 without looking back. But as his ship rose through the brown sky, Al made a decision. He needed to understand what had just happened. He needed to learn everything about humans. He needed to know how a soft creature from a soft world had turned him into prey. Al spent the next 3 months doing something he had never done before. He stopped taking contracts. He stopped hunting prey. Instead, he became a student. He wanted to understand humans. He traveled to information centers and libraries across 6 different star systems. He paid for access to restricted databases. He bribed officials and scholars for classified research. He interviewed anyone who had encountered humans and survived to tell about it. What he learned changed everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. Humans came from a planet called Earth. It was a small world in an unremarkable solar system at the edge of explored space. By galactic standards, it was a nightmare. Earth had extreme temperature variations. Humans lived in frozen wastelands where water turned to ice, and in burning deserts where the sun could kill in hours. They survived hurricanes and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. They swam in oceans full of predators and climbed mountains where the air was too thin to breathe. Most species in the galaxy had evolved on stable, gentle worlds. They had developed technology to protect them from nature. Humans had evolved on a world that seemed determined to kill them, and they had learned to survive through pure stubbornness. But that was only the beginning. Al learned about human biology. They were not as weak as they appeared. Their bodies could heal from injuries that would be fatal to most species. They could lose limbs and survive. They could be shot and stabbed and burned and still keep fighting. Their pain tolerance was beyond anything had encountered. Even more disturbing was their endurance. Humans had evolved as persistent predators. They could not run fast compared to their prey, but they could run forever. On Earth, humans had hunted animals by simply following them until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. The prey would run and hide and run again, but the human would always be there, walking steadily closer, never stopping, never giving up. This explained something had noticed about Grace Miller. She had not moved fast during their fight. She had moved efficiently. She had conserved her energy while he had wasted his on powerful strikes that hit nothing. She had simply waited for him to tire himself out. But the physical traits were not what frightened Al most. He learned about human psychology, about their social bonds, about their emotions. Humans formed attachments to other beings with an intensity that had no equal in the galaxy. They called it love. They felt it for their families, their friends, their communities. They felt it for their pets, their homes, their ideas. They even felt it for strangers who shared nothing with them except species. When these attachments were threatened, humans changed. They stopped thinking about survival. They stopped calculating risks. They became something else entirely. Al interviewed a merchant who had witnessed a human in this state. The merchant had been on a space station when a fire broke out. Everyone was evacuating to the escape pods, but a human woman heard that an alien child was trapped in a burning section. The child was not her species. The child was not her family. She had never met this child before. The woman ran into the fire anyway. She crawled through burning corridors filled with toxic smoke. She found the child and carried it to safety. When rescuers found her, she had burns covering most of her body. The doctors said she should have died from the pain alone, but she had kept moving until the child was safe. The merchant still had nightmares about the look in that woman's eyes. He said it was not courage. It was something beyond courage. It was absolute refusal to accept failure. Al found similar stories everywhere he looked. A warrior told him about fighting human soldiers in a border conflict. One human had taken wounds that should have been instantly fatal, but the human had kept shooting, kept advancing, kept fighting for another 3 minutes before finally collapsing. In those 3 minutes, he had killed 7 warriors. A tracker explained why his people never hunted humans. He said that humans could not be hunted because they always hunted back. If you attacked a human, that human would remember. If you killed a human, other humans would remember. They would come for you. They would find you. They might take years. They might take generations, but they would never stop. They used a word that Al had never heard before. The word was vendetta. It described a conflict that continued until one side was completely destroyed. Humans had invented this concept. Most species found it terrifying. Also learned about human warfare. Throughout their history, humans had fought each other with increasing efficiency. They had developed weapons and tactics that turned killing into a science. When they finally reached space and met other species, they brought all of this knowledge with them. Human soldiers were trained in ways that other species could barely comprehend. They learned to fight in any environment, against any enemy, with any weapon or no weapon at all. They learned to think creatively under pressure. They learned to endure pain and fear and exhaustion. They learned that the fight only ended when the enemy stopped moving. Grace Miller had mentioned she came from something called special operations. Researched this term and felt genuine fear for the first time in his adult life. Special operations soldiers were humans who had been selected for extreme ability and then trained beyond normal limits. They were the most dangerous beings on a planet full of dangerous beings. And now they were in the galaxy, working as mercenaries. Sat alone in his ship after finishing his research. He stared at the wall and thought about everything he had learned. He had spent his whole life believing that strength and claws and armor made a warrior. He had thought that size and speed determined who lived and who died. He had been wrong. Humans were not the strongest species. They were not the fastest or the toughest, but they had something that no other species could match. They simply refused to quit. And when you made them angry, when you hurt something they cared about, they became focused on one single goal. They would sacrifice everything to achieve that goal. Their own lives meant nothing compared to destroying their enemy. Al understood now why the other mercenaries feared them. It was not about what humans could do. It was about what they would do. He needed to speak with Grace Miller again, not to fight her, not to challenge her. He needed to understand more. He needed to know how to survive in a galaxy that now included humans. Finding Grace Miller took Al another 2 weeks. She moved frequently, taking contracts across different systems. She did not advertise her location or her services. Clients found her through word of mouth and secure communication channels. Eventually, Al tracked her to a Galactic Council advisory station in the system. She was there to file paperwork for her mercenary license renewal. Even killers for hire had to deal with bureaucracy sometimes. Al approached her carefully. He kept his arms visible and his claws retracted. He moved slowly so she could see him coming. He did not want her to think he was attacking. Grace watched him approach with those calm eyes. She recognized him immediately. She asked if he had come back to try again. Al said no. He said that he had spent the last 3 months learning about her species. He said that he understood now why he had lost their fight. He said that he was not there to challenge her. He wanted to talk. Grace studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded and gestured to a seat beside her. She said that she had some time before her appointment. They sat together in the waiting area of the station. Other beings moved around them, going about their business. None of them seemed to notice the 2 mercenaries having a quiet conversation. Al asked Grace about her past. He wanted to understand how she had become what she was. Grace told him that she had been a soldier on Earth before first contact. She had served in a unit that specialized in difficult missions: hostage rescue, counterterrorism, operations behind enemy lines. She had spent 15 years learning to fight and survive in the worst conditions her planet could offer. When humans joined the galactic community, many soldiers like her found new opportunities. The galaxy was larger and more dangerous than Earth, but the skills remained the same: observation, patience, precision, the ability to stay calm when everything was falling apart. Grace said that she was not special among humans. She was just someone who had trained hard and learned well. There were thousands like her on Earth, and more joining the galactic workforce every year. Al found this disturbing. He had assumed that Grace was exceptional. Learning that she was typical was far worse. He asked her about something he had noticed in his research. He asked about human anger, about what happened when humans were pushed too far. Grace was quiet for a moment, then she told him a story. Early in her mercenary career, she had worked with a partner. His name was Peter Cole. He was another former soldier, someone she had known for years. They took contracts together, watched each other's backs, built a reputation as a reliable team. Then a warlord took Peter hostage. The warlord thought this would force Grace to back down from a contract. He thought she would negotiate. He thought she would be reasonable. He was wrong. Grace spent 4 months hunting the warlord. She did not rush. She did not make mistakes. She simply dismantled everything he had built, piece by piece. She destroyed his ships first. She found them wherever they were docked and sabotaged them so they exploded when activated. She killed his pilots and his mechanics so he could not replace them. Then she went after his space stations. She did not attack them directly. She spread rumors that he had hidden treasures aboard them. Other criminals raided the stations looking for the treasure. The warlord lost more people and resources fighting off looters. She destroyed his alliances next. She contacted his partners and showed them evidence that he was planning to betray them. Some of the evidence was real. Some of it she had created. It did not matter. His partners abandoned him one by one. Finally, she attacked his reputation. She let everyone in the sector know that a single human was taking apart a warlord and that he could not stop her. Other beings who had grudges against him grew bold. They started attacking his remaining operations. They smelled weakness. By the time Grace reached his hiding place, the warlord had nothing left. No ships, no soldiers, no allies, no hope. Peter was already dead. He had died in the first week, before Grace even started her campaign. The warlord had killed him when he realized that the hostage was not working. It did not matter to Grace. The warlord had made it personal. He had hurt someone she cared about. Once that happened, there was no negotiation. There was no mercy. There was only the slow and complete destruction of everything he was. She killed him slowly. She made sure he understood why. She made sure he had time to regret every decision that had led him to this moment. Grace finished her story and looked at Al with those calm eyes. She asked him if he understood now. Al said that he thought he did, but he wanted to hear her explain it. Grace nodded. She said that humans had a term for what happened when they were pushed too far. Some called it seeing red. Others called it the red zone. It was a state where normal thinking stopped, where fear disappeared, where the only thing that mattered was making the enemy pay. Most species in the galaxy fought for survival or resources or territory. They calculated risks and benefits. They retreated when the odds turned against them. They surrendered when defeat was certain. Humans in the red zone did none of these things. They fought until they won or until they were dead. And even death did not always stop them. Other humans would continue the fight. Family members, friends, strangers who heard the story and felt the same anger. Grace said that this was the most important thing to understand about her species. Humans were reasonable most of the time. They could be generous and kind. They could be loyal partners and fair competitors. They did not start fights without cause. But there were lines that should never be crossed, hurting their families, threatening their children, attacking their communities. Once those lines were crossed, the human you were dealing with stopped being a person and became a force of nature. She told Al that the secret to surviving humans was simple. Do not make it personal, treat them fairly, respect their boundaries, and never, ever give them a reason to hate you. Sat in silence for a long time after Grace finished speaking. He thought about all the contracts he had taken over the years. He thought about the enemies he had made and the lives he had destroyed. He had been lucky that none of his targets had been under human protection. He had been lucky that he had never crossed a line with a human. He decided that his luck needed to become strategy. Grace stood up as her name was called for her appointment. She looked down at Al and told him that she hoped they would not meet again as enemies. She said that he seemed like a reasonable being who had learned a valuable lesson. Then she walked away, leaving Al alone with his thoughts and his new understanding of the galaxy. 1 year had passed since Al's defeat at the hands of Grace Miller. In that time, everything had changed. He still worked as a mercenary. He still took contracts and completed them with professional skill. But he had new rules now, rules that he followed without exception. He never took contracts against humans. He never took contracts against anyone under human protection. He never accepted jobs that might bring him into conflict with human interests. And whenever possible, he tried to warn others about the dangers they did not understand. Sat in the same drinking establishment on Nexus Prime where he had first heard about Grace Miller. The place had not changed. The same dark corners, the same smell of smoke and alien sweat, the same mercenaries discussing contracts and telling stories. But the stories were different now. More and more of them involved humans. Some were tales of victory, where human mercenaries had accomplished impossible tasks. Others were warnings, stories of what happened to those who underestimated the soft creatures from Earth. A young approached his table. The young one was barely 20 years old, fresh from military service on one of the colony worlds. His scales were bright and unmarked by battle scars. His eyes were full of confidence that had never been tested. Recognized himself in this young warrior. He saw the arrogance. He saw the certainty. He saw someone who believed that strength and claws and anger were enough to succeed in the galaxy. The young said that he had heard of Al. He said that Al was famous, a legend among their people. He said that he wanted advice about a contract he was considering. Al invited him to sit and asked about the contract. The young one explained eagerly. A wealthy client was paying enormous amounts for a raid on a human colony in the frontier territories. The colony was small and poorly defended. The humans there were mostly farmers and miners, not soldiers. The pay was incredible because most experienced mercenaries refused to take the job. The young did not understand why anyone would refuse such easy money. Humans were weak and soft. A proper assault force could overwhelm their defenses in hours. The whole operation would be simple. Felt cold certainty settle in his chest. He had heard stories like this before. He knew how they ended. He told the young one to refuse the contract. He told him that attacking a human colony was the worst decision he could possibly make. The young laughed. He asked what there was to fear from farmers and miners. Al began to explain. He talked about human biology and their impossible endurance. He talked about their persistence and their refusal to surrender. He talked about the red zone and what happened when humans were pushed too far. He told the young one about Grace Miller, about how she had destroyed a warlord over 4 months, about how she had dismantled everything he built because he made the mistake of hurting someone she cared about. The young listened with growing impatience. When Al finished, the young one shook his head and called him a coward. He said that Al had grown old and afraid. He said that the stories about humans were exaggerated. He said that he would take the contract and prove everyone wrong. Al tried one more time. He said that attacking a human colony would not just bring human defenders. It would bring humans from other colonies. Humans who considered strangers to be family simply because they shared a species. Humans who had nothing to do with the conflict but who would hear that someone attacked their people. He said that humans did not forget. They did not forgive. They did not stop. The young stood up from the table. He thanked Al for his time, but said that he would make his own decisions. He walked away with the confidence of someone who had never truly faced death. Al watched him go and felt only sadness. He had tried. He could do nothing more. 3 months later, news reached Nexus Prime about the raid on the human colony. The initial attack had succeeded. The assault force had landed and overwhelmed the defenders. They had killed many colonists and taken valuables. They had left believing that the operation was complete. They were wrong. The surviving colonists had sent messages to other human settlements. They had shared names and images of the attackers. They had told their story to anyone who would listen. Within weeks, human ships appeared in systems where the raiders operated, not military vessels, private ships owned by civilians who had heard what happened, farmers and merchants and teachers who had decided to become hunters. The raiders died one by one. Some were killed in obvious attacks, others simply disappeared. A few tried to surrender and found that no one was interested in accepting their submission. The young who had spoken to Al was among the last to die. He had fled across 4 star systems, hiding in the darkest corners of space. He thought he was safe. A retired human grandmother found him. Her name was. She was 73 years old. Her granddaughter had been one of the colonists killed in the initial raid. Had never killed anyone before. She had spent 50 years as a schoolteacher on a peaceful colony world. But when her granddaughter died, something inside her changed. She sold her home. She bought a ship. She learned to track and fight. She became exactly what humans became when someone hurt their family. She hunted the young for 6 months. When she finally caught him, she made sure he knew why he was dying. She made sure he understood that his victims had people who loved them. Then she finished her work and went home. Heard this story and shared it with everyone who would listen. He had become something unexpected in his old age. Not just a mercenary, but a teacher. Someone who tried to help others understand the truth about humans before they learned it the hard way. His reputation had changed. He was no longer known as the deadliest mercenary. He was known as the mercenary who had survived a human and lived to tell the tale. He was known as someone who spoke truth about the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Other beings came to him for advice now. They asked how to work with humans. They asked how to avoid conflict with them. They asked what the warning signs were when a human was approaching the red zone. Al told them what Grace Miller had told him. Be fair, be reasonable, respect their boundaries, and never make it personal. He had one final piece of advice that he shared with everyone. It was the most important lesson he had learned in his long life. It was the reason he was still alive while so many others had died. I beg you, he would say, never anger the humans. Some listened, some did not. Those who listened usually survived. Those who did not learn the truth in the end. They learned that the galaxy was no longer what it used to be. They learned that a new species had arrived, soft and small and unimposing. They learned that this species was more dangerous than anything evolution had produced on 1,000 other worlds. They learned what it meant to face a being who simply would not stop. And then they learned nothing more, because they were dead. Al continued his work, taking contracts and sharing warnings. He had found a purpose beyond killing. He had found a way to save lives by teaching others the lesson that had saved his own. The galaxy was changing. Humans were everywhere now, and their numbers grew every year. The old rules were fading. The old powers were adapting or dying. Al intended to adapt. He intended to survive. And he intended to make sure that everyone understood the most important rule in the new galaxy. Never anger the humans.